Now, Mr. Wieland holds the chair of Institutional Economics, Organizational Governance, Integrity Management, and Transcultural Leadership here at Zeppelin University, and he is also the academic lead of the Transcultural Leadership. He will talk about how we can mitigate risk that arises from cultural complexity. Welcome.
Okay, I would just add some observations to this morning's presentations, because for me, as a researcher and also a practitioner of transcultural management, Southeast Asia is a paradigmatic case with regard to chances and challenges of cooperation in an environment of cultural complexity. And complexity is just more as the diversity of different cultures or the huge amount of cultures or cultural influences, traditions in a certain area. Cultural complexity is about change management and is about the ability to lead this change. So cultural complexity management is not the adaptation to already existing cultural traditions, but it is a way to be part of a process to create new commonalities in an already ongoing process of cultural change. So this is a slightly different perspective on cultural complexity compared with the usual approaches. So what I will do then to make this a little bit more plausible is I will structure my presentation around three major challenges. One is that cultural complexity asks us for an enhanced understanding of the dynamics of cultural change. Because if it is true that there are so many cultures, thousands and thousands of languages, religions, and so on, then it doesn't make sense to have cultural management in a way that we compare these different cultures. Then we have to understand the dynamics of the evolution of these cultures and how we can get into this game. Because otherwise we would be simply challenged in a way that we could not manage. So this is the first thing. We have to understand the dynamic of cultural change. The second thing is, understanding is one thing, managing complexity and change is quite another. And I would like to focus here with regard to this on a more, should I say, a more traditional, basic instrument or how to run or manage a firm is risk management. So this is my perspective as an economist, but also on leadership. And I believe the combination of risk management and leadership both of them are contribution to manage cultural dynamics. Finally, as I already made the point, adapting to an already existing and more or less stable cultural environment is only one aspect of transcultural management. Creating proactive new commonalities, creating proactive shared values in a dialogue with others. This reminds us that culture is always in the making, and that's important, especially from a European perspective. We believe culture has something to do that is very, very old. It starts with the Greeks and goes to the Romans and the Christians and so on, and it's incredibly stable. But what we see now today, and the real challenge for the Western countries is that we have difficulties to cope with the dynamics of cultural development. A short look at the European Union and the cultural conflicts inside this union demonstrate this, that we focus on the traditional values, but that it's very hard for us on this basis to come to solutions for actual issues. So this is my spirit and I hope this will work. Yes. So let's start just with a short description of cultural complexity and change. And we have heard a lot of this, and we know it's driven by diversity and resilience. I do not want to dig into this diversity issues. Charles Fisher called it Balkans on the Orient, and I think it was a more post-colonial perspective on it. So trouble is ahead, yeah? Don't go to the Balkans. And I believe, from my perspective, from a cultural complexity perspective, we should accept that this diversity of cultures in a global and regional interaction, this is the new normal. We are no longer can do our business, our interaction, our cooperative activities in a stable and homogeneous cultural environment. We have to accept this, that the 19th century has gone and that we're now living in a century where we have to deal with these dynamics. One thing we can learn from Southeast Asia, as already mentioned, is how to deal with these challenges. And resilience is one of these words. Resilience means be open, be selective, be adaptive, and to see culture as a learning process, not as something which is given. So and you are part of this learning process. You can contribute something as a firm, as a person. So it is open-ended, constantly in motion, as contesting traditions, sustaining traditions, and important, what you learned so far, and what is a big point, you should be pragmatic. It doesn't make sense to start with very fundamental discussions about cultural issues. You should be pragmatic with regard to certain activities. Given this starting point, I would like to say that Southeast Asia is a good point for observing and learning from a process to develop a culture. And in order to do this, I would differentiate 3 steps in this learning process in Southeast Asia. Step number 1 was to use pan-Asian values and orientation towards these Asian values to trigger economic growth by referring to these cultural traditions and heritage of Asia. So this was started with culture is our tradition, our Asian tradition, as opposed to the Western tradition, and to some extent also not in line with this. And here in the Bangkok Declaration from 1993, we find all these values: Confucianism, loyalty and duty to family, stability, work ethics, social harmony, group over individual consensus, and so on and so on. And we all know that this is more or less the idea about Asian values. That was in 1993. I do not want to comment on this, whether this is authorian or paternalistic or so, just as a matter, I take it as a matter of fact. That it was a promise, if you follow these values, there will be economic success. And I offer you an exchange, security are paramount to political and civil rights. The point here is, what we have to learn, and what the Asian people also learned, that this approach failed. It was discredited by the social consequences of the financial and political crisis in the 90s. There was a loss of legitimacy of authoritarian structures and power. So it doesn't simply not make sense to stick to Asian values as so to say, as an unbroken tradition of Confucian thinking. This is a dynamic complex. So the next step in this dynamic process where, I hope do I have this now?
Usually you just need to click once and then wait for a little while, and the receiver is up there, so maybe if you hold it a bit.
The next one?
Yep.
Okay. The next one, the next step number 2 was the search for authentic Asian values, so-called, and it was in the context of the Asean Charter from 2007. I took the opportunity to do some research in this, and you see here, the motto is one vision, one identity, one caring and sharing community. A lot of principles, cooperation, consensus, democracy, freedom, and so on. I don't want to, but not just the traditional ones. They simply added values. And these values are part of a development to modernize these Southeast Asian countries. And I believe that this is important because this claim that you have common values as a unity in diversity is something different as to claim to have pan-Asian values. It reminded me a little bit on the European Union, this unity in diversity, and I think this is a decision to find a new type of culture which creates a common understanding what is going on in the world, but still has a large potential for political, ethnic, territorial conflicts and tensions within Asia, ASEAN. And there are research which demonstrate that there are a lot of conflicts, starting with war and all the other economic conflicts. So then here the focus is creating a joint identity, creating a sense of belonging to belong to community by keeping your own identity. And this development asks for new intergovernmental network, and that is ASEAN. The third step then was a new paper launched in 2015, ASEAN Community Vision 2025. And here we find, compared with the 2007 Charter, again, additional principles: common identity, shared prosperity, shared values and norms. All these values are similar to the Sustainable Development Goals. And here you see again the learning process by including values from a global movement to more sustainable development. Now they talk about the Asian way, going beyond Asian values in the ASEAN community, in a global community of nations. So now we are living in a completely different set of values and cultures. Still, that does not mean that the traditions are fading away. They are still there. But now we have new points to discuss, which could be important for companies, corporations, but also NGOs, because now you are connected to a worldwide movement. So here then, I believe that the relational governance structure to run this process, multilateral schemes, regional multipolarity, community building, culture is seen as a soft institutionalism, that bargaining processes are discrete, informal, non-confrontal bargaining style, consensus building. That's what we see. And that is something that we also can learn when we adapt our management and leadership style. So this is my first aspect here. And now would come to the consequences we could reach by how can we, by thinking about how can we deal with this? As I said, risk is a term which might be suitable, especially for companies. Why risk? Because cultures and changing cultures influence the perception of what is the situation, and also gives us orientation what to do in this situation. So, for example, if you live in a culture where child labor is a family duty, you will not see any human rights violation. And if you believe that bribing is nurturing a network of good friends, you might not see that this is a criminal act. So this value perception is important, but coming from different religious heritage, reference points, different types of identity and belonging, and different ways to develop your political culture. This risk might lead to frictions and turbulences in cooperative behavior inside organizations and between organizations. A loss of productivity, not optimal market positions, compliance issues, inefficient corporate governance, all these challenges for doing good governance and good business in a complex arena. So therefore we need this risk management. Leadership, as when I understood it right, in Asia is not a function, but a value itself. So I try to find out what is a good leader from a perspective, from a Southeast Asian perspective, and these are the 5 points I found. Being creative and risk-taking, flexibility, achievements count, your qualities to negotiate. Articulating a vision, public oratory, spiritual power, the organization as a family, showing benevolence, being strong, loyal, monitoring operations, being directive and being authoritative, expressed power by big man, hero, and other theory. What I find then is that we can see commonalities to a Western perspective on leadership, similarities too, but also differences. But what is important, what I have learned, is that leadership itself is a value and not a technique. It's your personality, your character, your role model, which is important and which has a huge influence. So therefore, I try to find some leadership style recommendations, how to realize these positions of leadership in dealing with complexity and change. And I believe that these are the following. I will not go through them in deeper, but just to mention them. So you should strive for mutual benefit, explicitly. You should look for practical solutions. You should develop creativity in a mindful way. You should avoid to judge too early. There is no need to come always up with an opinion about something you see in a country, which is not common to you. You should listen carefully, you should be kind and polite. You should settle conflicts thoughtfully, stick to your promise, establish long-term perspectives, partnerships, act with integrity, treat others as you would wish to be treated, and apply impartial fairness to everybody. The don'ts on the other side are things you should avoid. Bringing this together in a nutshell, I would like to say that management of cultural complexity is risk management. And as far as I see it, until now we don't have a risk management system including cultural influences. And that looks a little bit dangerous. We have to work on this. And on the other side, we need leadership, understood as a value in itself, as a contribution, to deal with these changes and this cultural complexity and bringing about new commonalities. Thank you very much.